From I have a dream to I have a screed. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a special live edition of Rebel HQ. I'm David Shuster, and what a week this has been. Donald Trump's news conference, he compared himself to Martin Luther King. He also meandered, lied, and renewed a lot of questions about his cognition. We will get to that in just a moment. Plus, Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, is deepening his own image as creepy and weird. Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, have become the ultimate happy warriors. We'll talk about that. They're drawing huge crowds and widening their lead in the polls. We'll show you some of the numbers, and we'll bring you the video out of the week and the video memories of the week and life's lessons. But let's get right started with Donald Trump and his news conference. The former president tried to have something of a reset in which he took some of the tension away from Tim Walz and Kamala Harris and the rollout of Tim Walz, but it didn't really go so well, in part because of a string of whoppers that Donald Trump delivered, including one where he was referring to the former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, who was an ex-boyfriend of Kamala Harris. Watch this.
Well, I know Willie Brown very well. In fact, I went down in a helicopter with him. We thought maybe this is the end. We were in a helicopter going to a certain location together, and there was an emergency landing. This was not a pleasant landing, and Willie was he was a little concerned. So I know him pretty well. I mean, I haven't seen him in years, but he told me terrible things about her. But this is what you're telling me anyway, I guess. But he had a big part in what happened with Kamala. But he I don't know, maybe he's changed his tune, but he was not a fan of hers very much at that point.
Mr. President. That's the reaction that Willie Brown had. He laughed. He was asked by local stations, well, what about this? Did you take a helicopter with Donald Trump? Was it in some sort of danger? He's like, no, I've never done any business with Donald Trump. Yeah, I had a lunch with him, but we never talked about Kamala Harris. I've never had any sort of helicopter rides or aircraft rides with him. Although Brown said he remembered once Donald Trump sending his own plane to pick up Willie Brown in Boston and bring him to New York, but Donald Trump wasn't even on the plane, and they had a lunch, but nothing ever materialized. So why would Donald Trump say that he had heard from Willie Brown and that Willie Brown said bad things about Kamala Harris? Well, maybe Donald Trump is making it up, but also maybe Donald Trump, according to the New York Times, got confused between Willie Brown, the former mayor of San Francisco who was African-American, and Jerry Brown, the former governor of California, who was white. Because in 2018, when Jerry Brown was governor and Gavin Newsom was lieutenant governor of California, Donald Trump did take a helicopter ride with them to go look at the California wildfires, but Gavin Newsom says there was absolutely nothing remarkable about the helicopter flight. There was no sort of danger. There were no sort of problems. So you have two issues going on here. Donald Trump is confusing, obviously, Willie Brown and Jerry Brown, and Donald Trump was just making stuff up about Kamala Harris and allegedly from an ex-boyfriend who somehow doesn't have nice things to say because Donald Trump doesn't want anybody to say nice things about Kamala Harris. Now, that wasn't even the biggest whopper at Donald Trump's news conference. The biggest whopper actually came when Donald Trump was on this riff about, and let me put myself back up in full screen here. Donald Trump was on this riff where he was talking about how we need smart leaders in this country. We have to have smart leaders, and Kamala Harris isn't smart. And literally within seconds, Donald Trump pivots to the reason that he's smart in his own mind is because of these amazing crowds that Donald Trump is able to draw. Watch this.
Picture of the crowd, the biggest crowd I've ever spoken. I've spoken to the biggest crowds. Nobody's spoken to crowds bigger than me. If you look at Martin Luther King, when he did his speech, his great speech, and you look at ours, same real estate, same everything, same number of people. If not, we had more. And they said he had 1 million people, but I had 25,000 people. But when you look at the exact same picture, and everything's the same because it was the fountains, the whole thing, all the way back to from Lincoln to Washington, and you look at it, and you look at the picture of his crowd, my crowd, we actually had more people. They said I had 25,000, and he had 1 million people, and I'm okay with it because I liked Dr. Martin Luther King. Yeah.
Well, if Donald Trump is okay with it, then why is he bringing it up? And oh, by the way, the Park Service, the police, photographs of both events all show, and everybody says that no, the MLK March on Washington had hundreds of thousands of people, had a much bigger crowd than Donald Trump's January 6th Stop the Steal rally. Now, even if Donald Trump had 50,000 or 75,000 people, which would be generous based on the Park Service estimates, that would still be far less than Martin Luther King's speech in which Martin Luther King talked about, I have a dream. Well, here's the worst part about it. And that is Martin Luther King's March on Washington was all about promoting democracy, about lifting us up, about unifying us, about making America better. Donald Trump's Stop the Steal speech was about blocking democracy, about trying to rally his supporters to block the certification of Joe Biden, because on January 6th, that was the day that the Senate and the House, they were going to certify the Electoral College. And by the way, Joe Biden had won by 7 million votes, but we don't have to get back into January 6th. But that's, in Donald Trump's own mind, his grievances got the biggest crowd that he has ever seen. And that it was the biggest crowd perhaps in Washington history, certainly bigger than Martin Luther King. It's crazy. And at a news conference where Donald Trump was trying to sort of reset the campaign and draw attention back away from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and sort of bring it back to himself and bring it back to the Trump Republican message that, oh, the Democrats are too liberal. What this has simply done is it has reinforced that Donald Trump perhaps has some sort of dementia, that he's literally crazy and he has lost all judgment. Because part of what the Trump campaign has been trying to do is build up the support among African Americans. Well, comparing yourself to Martin Luther King in such an obvious lie is not going to help Donald Trump with that. So it gets to the secondary question. If it's not, if it's not helping him appeal with African Americans, what is it doing? Well, it's simply helping Donald Trump soothe his own ego. Now, I want to get to some of your comments and questions, and then we'll pick up in just a second with Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. Lick, probably after jail term, possible job suitable for him as storytelling or comedian. I don't even think that's very funny, though, what Donald Trump is doing, because, and by the way, most comedians, they sort of laugh and smile when they tell a joke. Donald Trump is sort of deadly serious about all this. He's grim in his delivery, and that's part of the problem, because we're going to talk about the contrast between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the happy warriors that we see in Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. J.D. Vance has literally never voted in favor of workers. We're going to talk about J.D. Vance in just a second. Chuck Clunker Huck, this was a gift to Vice President Harris and Walz, and that is a great point. Because again, the news conference was intended to try to take attention away from Harris and Walz, and it did, but it took attention away from the Republican message about them and put it on this sort of theme that Donald Trump is not stable, that something's off with his mind, that something's wrong up there in his head. Because anybody who's got any sort of sense of rationality, first of all, you wouldn't even make the comparison to Martin Luther King. Secondly, to somehow just sort of claim, oh, my crowd was bigger, even if Donald Trump really thinks that. And I think he probably does think his January 6th rally was the biggest crowd he's ever seen and bigger than anything possible. Why would you bring that up? Your argument is, oh, the media has been unfair to me. Okay, just say the media has been unfair to me and how they cover me. But why bring that up? I mean, that's just Looney Tunes. Now, speaking of Looney Tunes, let's talk about J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate. So the rap against Donald Trump, and by the way, I appreciate everybody who's joining the live stream. We're going to be taking more of your questions. And also, go ahead and hit the subscribe button right there on YouTube so you can be part of the Rebel HQ family. And what it'll do is it'll set the algorithm so some of the Rebel HQ videos pop up when you click on YouTube. And if you really want to help TYT and all of our networks, go become a member of TYT. Go to the TYT.com website, and you can have a membership, which gives you all sorts of different perks and bonuses and videos that you can't even get on YouTube. Now, back to J.D. Vance. While the argument from Donald Trump has been that the Democrats are too liberal, and now Donald Trump's dealing with this perception that Donald Trump is Looney Tunes. With J.D. Vance, the perception has been that J.D. Vance is a bit weird. He's the guy who talked about, we're run by a nation of, Democrats who are cat ladies. And J.D. Vance praises Mountain Dew, the good stuff. Well, at a time when J.D. Vance seems a bit sort of stilted and awkward in terms of how he speaks and what he says and how he comes across, J.D. Vance found himself in Eau Claire, Wisconsin this week on the same airport tarmac as Vice President Kamala Harris's plane. Kamala Harris was there with Tim Walz for a rally. Well, J.D. Vance saw the Kamala Harris plane, and so he decided to walk over to it and talk to the media that was in front. And you tell me whether you think this is creepy, stalkerish, or what's going on here. Watch.
I'd come by and wanted to take a good look at the plane. hopefully it's going to be my plane in a few months. But
I'm going to stop right there. Hopefully it's going to be my plane in a few months. JD Vance, it's not going to be your plane. It's the people's plane. It's the plane that belongs to the government of the United States of America, the people of the United States of America. We essentially loan it to whoever is the vice president. We essentially loan Air Force One to whoever is the president. I've never heard Kamala Harris say, that's my plane, or hear Joe Biden say, that's my plane. Maybe, I mean, Air Force One is what I ride on. But the idea that this is the entitlement that you're projecting here is just remarkable and sickening. But let's keep going.
I also thought you guys might get lonely because the vice president doesn't answer questions from reporters and hasn't for 17 days. Have they given you guys an explanation for why she won't take questions from reporters? No?
No, nobody responds.
Nobody? Okay, great. Well, I hope that she changes her mind because it'd be good for the American people, and I think it'd be good for you all if she actually ran a real campaign instead of one from a basement with a teleprompter. So have a good one, guys. See ya.
What would you like to hear from her?
Okay, now that was bizarre. It fell flat. I get that he was trying to get some media attention from the reporters who were covering Kamala Harris and were there parked at the airport. But he came over with this sort of swagger. He referred to, I hope this is going to be my plane. Have you guys had any, interactions with Kamala Harris? Any questions for me? No. It was terrible. What a crazy, bizarre moment. And it just reinforces there's something really odd about JD Vance in terms of how he comes across. I don't know him personally. Maybe he's a perfectly nice guy, nice to his friends and family. But the perception that is building out there is that, well, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota is the guy who would sort of, chat you up at the bar and rescue you from some sort of pervert or somebody who's being mean to you. Walz would step in and help you. JD Vance is that guy who might be that pervert, who might be the guy who tries to spike your drink and then do something to you if he can get you out of the bar and you're unconscious. That's how he comes across, and that's how the stalking stuff comes across with what he just did. Now, is that fair? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure he's a fine guy, and I'm sure that, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota has his own sort of foibles. And there have been some comments about how, Tim Walz, shook his wife's hand instead of gave her a hug at some rally, whatever. But again, the image is so crucial in politics. The image of JD Vance right now is that this guy is creepy, that he's some sort of stalker, that he's awkward, he's not a very good speaker. And the image of Donald Trump, his boss in this campaign, is that Donald Trump is simply unhinged. Now, Donald Trump at his news conference said that he still supports JD Vance and that JD Vance has done great. But you could argue, well, that's just another one of these sort of whoppers from Donald Trump, because by most accounts, even by Republicans, JD Vance has had a heck of a time. Let's let's put up a couple of viewer comments here while we're waiting here before I load the next thing. Lawrence, haven't you heard Donald Trump, creator of the universe? Just ask him, isn't Donald Trump always right? Vote blue. BPMS, it's one to not take questions from reporters and reporters not wanting to ask you any questions. That's exactly it. Bad enough that JD Vance isn't even being asked any questions from reporters. That's hilarious. Biden should make Harris president while he still has complete immunity. No, I don't think so. Matt Martin, okay, MAGA? Matt Martin, okay. I'm not talking Matt Martin. Matt, all right. Then she shouldn't run again in 2028. I'm glad that you guys are having a side conversation on the YouTube comments, which I think is great. Trump had bigger crowds than Jesus. Well said. Well said. Let's talk about the Democrats and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz from Minnesota. So this was the week, believe it or not. It feels like it was ages ago when Kamala Harris announced that Tim Walz was a running mate. Believe it or not, that was just Monday, just 5 days ago. But they've been on this barnstorming tour across parts of the East Coast and the Midwest, and now they're going to Arizona and Nevada. And they're talking about, freedom. Kamala Harris's message is, freedom is what they're fighting for. Freedom for women to be able to control their own bodies, freedom for children to be able to go to school without getting shot, freedom to be able to choose the doctor of your choice because of the Affordable Care Act. I think there's also this sort of freedom from Donald Trump, which is part of the undercurrent of the message. But in any case, it's a pretty interesting sort of message from Kamala Harris. And she's talking very much about we're moving forward. We're not going back. And that's been one of the rallying cries that Tim Walz says at the rally. We're not going back. And then the crowd erupts. We're not going back. Well, in the midst of, pretty good speeches, and both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, by all accounts, are drawing pretty significant crowds as far as Democrats are concerned, 25,000, 30,000 at these rallies. And so the energy seems to be there. And a number of reporters who were covering the Harris campaign said it reminds them a little bit of the final few months with Barack Obama, when crowds were so interested in seeing him and essentially being part of the history that Barack Obama was making. And there was a certain energy there. And a number of reporters who were following the Harris campaign say it's the same sort of thing we're seeing now. The crowds are overflowing. There's an energy, there's an enthusiasm, and people think there's this history in the making with the first woman president, if in fact she wins. In the midst of all this, Kamala Harris was in Michigan, and she was talking about what Donald Trump, and she was on a riff about Donald Trump's going to end healthcare coverage and not do anything about climate change, when there was a protester, a Palestinian protester, who yelled and screamed and tried to interrupt Kamala Harris. And look at how she responded. Watch.
To surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
Now that was impressive on a couple of counts. First of all, the rap against Kamala Harris is that maybe she's not so good off the cuff, and that she's maybe not a confident speaker. That showed incredible confidence to be able to stop and say, if you want Donald Trump, keep going. Otherwise, I'm speaking. The crowd loved it. Kamala Harris sort of had these almost like lasers that were coming out of her eyes at the Palestinian demonstrator, and literally took control of the room. And I think in particular for women candidates, the challenge, I think inherently for some of them, is that with men, there's sort of a natural, oh, men can be in control. Whereas it's a little bit harder for female candidates, I think, to sort of project that they're in command, they're in control, they sort of own the room. But what Kamala Harris did just there is she did that. She said, this is essentially my room. I'm in command here. I'm in control. I'm strong. This is my rally. If you want Donald Trump to win, keep going, but I'm speaking. And so I think people were reacting not even just to the effective way that she sort of ad-libbed and cut off the protester and got the crowd fired up, but she projected incredible confidence that she's in charge. And that's a crucial part for, I think, any woman. And sometimes it's a hurdle that they have to overcome. But Kamala Harris seems to be hurdling it quite well. And I think that's one of the reasons why this particular clip was one of the most tweeted or X'd clips on social media this week. Tens of millions of people saw this. And again, it's just a heckler that Kamala Harris largely destroyed, and she puts the heckler in the heckler's place. The flip side of this is that, for Palestinians who are demonstrating against the Democrats and the Biden-Harris support for Israel, it can come across as, well, you don't matter. And I think there is some sensitivity among Democrats to try to say, look, we don't want to infuriate or anger the progressives who support, Palestinians, and there should be a voice for everybody. But I would argue that, the voice for Palestinian demonstrators or any demonstrator is not in the middle of a rally, not in the middle of a campaign rally. You can hold signs, you can greet the candidate when they go in and out, or their motorcade, or their plane, as J.D. Vance was trying to do. But interrupting a political rally usually doesn't go well for the person who's demonstrating. And my view is that it usually turns off at least the people in the room against whatever cause that demonstrator is promoting. Now, let's talk about the perhaps most well, let's get your comments first, and then I'll get back to JD Vance and the couch. Victor, she wants the protesters to stop, then she needs to take an anti-war stance. Look, I hear you, Victor. She has taken an anti-war. The Biden-Harris administration has repeatedly tried to get Israel to scale back the operation in Gaza and to protect civilians. And there's been incredible efforts by Biden and Harris to try to create some sort of ceasefire. But it's not all on sort of Israel. There's also responsibility on Hamas, the terror organization that carried out October 7th, to finally say, okay, we're not going to put any more civilians in harm's way. Let's have a ceasefire. And so far, Hamas has been unwilling to do that. So it's a more complicated situation than just, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden should be anti-war. John Smith, off topic, but check new body cam footage released. You know, I'm going to perhaps do a video on Rebel HQ later. I think the body cam footage that you're referring to, that John's referring to, is from the Trump assassination in Pennsylvania. They have new body cam footage from the police confronting the shooter, Crooks. So we'll get to that later, and that's certainly trending on social media. Now, I want to get back to Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, because one of the epic put downs that we saw from him this week of the Republicans is not only that Donald Trump and JD Vance are weird, but Tim Walz went to this sort of speculation that JD Vance is so weird that maybe JD Vance had sex with an inanimate object, a couch. There was a fake, false narrative that was put out there on Twitter. It was a joke, but it picked up steam. The Associated Press drew even more attention to it when it did a fact check and said, oh, there's no truth. There's no evidence that JD Vance ever wrote about, you know, having sex with a couch. There's some people who say, well, maybe it wasn't in his book, but maybe it was in a draft of his book. Well, there's no evidence of that, but you know, it's out there. And when JD Vance spoke about, with a reference to Vance's couch at Tim Walz's kickoff rally, the crowd went crazy. Now, CNN has asked the question whether this is appropriate or not. And unfortunately for CNN, the person who's asking this and making the judgments that this is somehow gross is Jake Tapper, who did some things at the CNN presidential debate that most journalists said were gross. But we'll get into that in a second. Here's Jake Tapper on Tim Walz. Watch.
Because there's this, I'm hesitant to even bring it up, but there's this gross online smear about JD Vance involving couches, okay? And the only reason I cite it is because Governor Walz made a reference to it during his introduction speech yesterday.
And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So.
A clear reference to this gross smear. So, I mean, whatever happened to Michelle Obama's when they go low, we go higher?
I think.
All right. So the Democratic pundit said, look, they're just having fun. They're just, you know, sort of a joke. It was sort of a reference that people could sort of make their own judgment, but, you know, ease up. The issue here, though, the reason I play this is not because of, you know, what the pundits say and whether it's appropriate. And we can all make our own judgment about whether Democrats should be, you know, making these sort of jokes or not. The problem is that when CNN's Jake Tapper or Dana Bash, when they're the ones to accuse a politician or anybody of doing something gross or inappropriate, that's really sort of rich, because in the media world, I'd say the biggest setback that broadcast media had this year, the lowest moment for all of us in the broadcast journalism world, came during the CNN presidential debate when Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, who I guarantee you they could fact check Donald Trump off the top of their head. They knew where Donald Trump was going to lie because of how Donald Trump has lied before, but they were under orders: don't push back, don't fact check. Allow both Joe Biden and Donald Trump to sort of say whatever they want and don't say anything except, okay, next question. To me, and to I think a lot of people in the business, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash sold out. They abandoned their journalistic responsibilities. They essentially provided a platform for lies from both candidates, and they legitimized lying. Not only small lies, but big lies, because the big whoppers from Donald Trump, nothing got corrected. And there was Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who were very smart, who I like personally, who simply abdicated their professional responsibilities. That was gross and disgusting and inappropriate. So for Jake Tapper to now say, this is a gross comment from Tim Walz, or that it's inappropriate, is absurd. And that in itself is obscene. There was an opportunity, from what I understand, talking about CNN and Jake Tapper and Dana Bash in the debate, that they were approached by management, and management said, we'd like you to be the host of this debate, but here are the ground rules. You can't push back. You can't fact check. And I would imagine if Jake Tapper is the same Jake Tapper that I knew and was friends with years ago, that Jake's initial reaction would have been, oh, come on, we got to fact check. We have to do this. At least that's what I'm hoping he did. But at a certain point, from what I'm told, management said, look, you either follow along, or we'll get somebody else from CNN who will pose the questions and leave it at that. And Jake Tapper and Dana Bash felt like, oh, okay, well, the attention that we would get from hosting the debate, the credibility, the status we would have, that's too important. So, okay, we'll just count on Joe Biden fact-checking Donald Trump. And when Joe Biden was unable to do that, then the selling out of Jake Tapper and Dana Bash and CNN became that much more obvious. And it was so disappointing to so many of us in the media. And again, I guarantee you, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, they know how Donald Trump's going to lie. They could correct the lies in real time, but they were ordered not to do so. And that was horrific. That was perhaps the lowest moment for the media in this campaign. So for Jake Tapper, of all people, to now be the one saying, oh, it's gross, it's inappropriate for Tim Walz to make a veiled reference to J.D. Vance on the couch. Come on, Jake. Don't go there. And again, that's the problem that CNN has right now, is Jake Tapper and Dana Bash. They don't have any credibility to fact check anybody right now or to suggest that anything is inappropriate or wrong, because what they did was wrong. But anyway, enough with the media. Let's go to the Trump message right now. And by most accounts, I think the Donald Trump, J.D. Vance message about Democrats is largely incoherent. And that's because it's all over the map. The campaign wants to keep pushing. Let's get rid of Jake Tapper here. The campaign wants to be pushing that that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are San Francisco liberals. They're too liberal for America. They're extreme. And maybe that might be an effective message if, in fact, all of the Republicans are on the same page. But at the same time, the campaign is putting that forward. There's Donald Trump going off on crazy tangents about his crowd sizes and saying that Kamala Harris is despicable and that people say bad things about her. And then there's J.D. Vance, who instead of saying, well, you know, the Democrats are too liberal, J.D. Vance, one of his first lines of attack this week is that somehow Tim Walz was engaged in stolen valor because after 24 years of serving in the Army Reserves, Tim Walz left with 2 years left that he could have had at his sort of final sort of promotion position. And by the way, it was in those sort of 2 years after Walz had left when his unit was deployed to Iraq. So J.D. Vance, who is a Marine, and we'll get into more on that in a second, here's the message that that J.D. Vance tried to deliver about Tim Walz. And let's see if I can find this. Here it is. Let's try this.
Wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? When was this? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage. Do not pretend to be something that you're not. And if he wants to criticize me for getting an Ivy League education, I'm proud of the fact that my mamaw supported me, that I was able to make something of myself. I'd be ashamed if I was him and I lied about my military service like he did.
Okay, a couple things. And let's put me up and him small. I'd be ashamed if I lied about my military record. Well, here's the record that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has. He spent 24 years in the Army Reserves, 24 years. In May of 2005, he left the Army Reserves with a slew of medals and honors. He retired honorably with the rank of Master Sergeant. The Master Sergeant rank was a downgrade from the Sergeant Major that he was given earlier in the year. But at the time that he withdrew from the Guard with an honorably, he had not completed one training course in order to sustain the Sergeant Major that he had earned. One training class. Now, again, in January of 2005, that's when Tim Walz filed his paperwork to run for Congress. He withdraws from the Army unit in May of 2005. And then 2 months later, in July of 2005, Walz's former unit gets notified about a deployment to Iraq. And that deployment to Iraq did not happen until the next year in March of 2006. So again, Walz files his paperwork in January. He announces he withdraws from the Guard unit in May, and then in July, that's when they get their notice they're going to deploy to Iraq. And that's stolen valor because Tim Walz is not going with his unit to Iraq. That's what J.D. Vance is saying. Now, there is a clip out there of Tim Walz at an event from several years ago talking about weapons of war that he carried out, weapons that are in combat. And yes, Tim Walz never saw combat. But really, J.D. Vance, you're going to go there and accuse Tim Walz of stolen valor? It's really bizarre for a whole host of reasons, because Donald Trump, remember Captain Bone Spurs, because of his problems with his feet, Donald Trump was unable to avoid Vietnam for reasons that are kind of strange. And Donald Trump, who has denigrated military service and described people who died in war as suckers and losers. And as for J.D. Vance did spend 4 years in the Marines, and he was deployed to Iraq as a combat correspondent. You know what a combat correspondent is, everybody? That's somebody who writes press releases from air-conditioned buildings and gives them to the media, to folks like me. So when I was, for example, when I was covering Central Command for NBC News at the beginning of the Iraq War, there were combat correspondents from the Marines who would give us press releases and updates and information and units that were involved and what was going on. And it was a very nice air-conditioned building that they operated out of. That's what J.D. Vance did. He did not see combat. He was writing out press releases on behalf of the Marines. And in fact, later, J.D. Vance wrote, I was lucky to escape any real fighting. Do you know any Marines who are saying, oh, I was lucky to avoid any fighting? No, Marines, the good ones say, I saw action, or my brothers saw action, and I wish that I would have seen action. I wish I could have joined them. That's what you expect from Marines. But J.D. Vance, I was lucky that I didn't see combat. And by the way, he's trying to accuse Tim Walz of stolen valor. Tim Walz, who was served for 24 years and then ran for Congress. Now, aside from J.D. Vance just making up stuff and ridiculous claims about Tim Walz, which, by the way, I don't think are going anywhere, and suggests that because the Republicans have largely backed off of this, I don't think it's really had much of an impact anyway. But here's the problem. It reminds everybody that Donald Trump didn't serve. Donald Trump was not in the military. Donald Trump used his bone spurs to get out of military service. That's not very valiant. That's not valor. And so it doesn't make any sense. It's an attack that's just bizarre because, again, it brings attention to Donald Trump's lack of military service. And any day in which the media is talking about stolen valor and the claims back and forth between, J.D. Vance and the Democratic running mate Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, that's a day in which the Republicans are not driving any attention to the main claim that the campaign says they want to be making, and that is that the Democrats are too liberal. The muddled message from Republicans is why you hear a lot of Republicans in Capitol Hill, a lot of members of Congress who are starting to freak out now, not only over the polls, but also because the message does not have discipline from Trump and Vance. And that is hurting the Republicans because with a muddled message, the Democrats are on point. They keep talking about freedom and we're moving forward and freedom for women and freedom from gun violence. And, oh, by the way, Donald Trump wants to take us back. The Democrats are on point and on message. The Republicans are all over the map. And it's starting to show up now in some of the polls. But here, let's talk about some of the polls. Let me bring J.D. Vance down. And actually, before we talk about the polls, I am going to remind everybody, hit the subscribe button right here on YouTube. So you can be part of the algorithm so that Rebel HQ videos are always there for you whenever you click on your YouTube homepage. Also, if you want to go to TYT.com, become a member of TYT, and you get all sorts of special video and content that is not available on YouTube. A couple comments. Dave Dowling, Trump already won 2 impeachments and more. I hear ya. McRoshan, Zetrix mixed up there. Tank use diesel. All right. Matt Martin, would you guys honor a Trump win if that happened? Hey, Matt. Yes. If Donald Trump wins, I would honor that. I wouldn't like it, but I wouldn't rally people in the streets to block the certification. And I'm pretty sure Kamala Harris would honor that certification as well. And so the issue right now is that the part of this country that doesn't seem to accept the results if they lose is MAGA world. There's already efforts being made by the Trump campaign to have lawyers in so many different states and people who are ready to file appeals if it seems like the vote is not going their way. So when it comes to honoring a win, MAGA world needs to sort of look at its own self. You're still in Iraq for F's sake. Okay. Tanks don't. Okay. Enough of the tanks don't use diesel. All right. Let's go on to the polls. Here we go. Ready? Polls. CNBC. Trump 48, Harris 46. The 2-point Trump advantage is the same distance that it was in July when it was Trump 45, Biden 43. And again, the margin of error in the CNBC poll is 3.1, so it's statistically a dead heat. Rasmussen Reports, which is a Republican pollster. Trump 49, Harris 44. The margin of error is 2.0. But again, this is the favorite poll of Fox News. This is the poll that Donald Trump cited in his news conference. Most of the other pollsters say that Rasmussen Reports is nonsense and that they don't really, that they tilt things to favor Republicans. NPR, Harris plus 3, 51-48. Survey USA, Harris plus 3, 48-45. Morning Consult, which is considered the best of all of these polls because of the size of the large number of people that they survey, 11,000 in this poll, which means the margin of error is down to 1. It is what's known as a statistically significant sample of 11,000. Morning Consult, Harris 48, Trump 44. That's Harris plus 4. The margin of error is 1. So Harris could be up by 5 or she could be up by 3. But that is not a dead heat. And look, Republicans are seeing this as well. Republicans outside of the campaign, I think even inside the campaign, they recognize what Rasmussen is and sort of dismiss it. Republicans are nervous, again, because not only the poll numbers going the Harris Walz way, and you're starting to see, huge crowd show up and incredible enthusiasm. The Democrats are on point. They're disciplined with their message. Republicans, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are all over the place with their message against the Democrats. And oh, by the way, all the Trump and Vance keep doing is digging their own hole deeper when it comes to assertions that Donald Trump is weird, that J.D. Vance is creepy, that they're not the sort of people you'd want to have a drink with, or the sort of people who would steal your drink, whatever the analogy is, whatever the line is. Okay, let's go to the ad of the week. Got a little bit of time here. 35 minutes we've been at this so far. Thanks to 1,200 of you who are still with us. I appreciate it. Actually, before we do some ads, let's do more comments. JP Mandel. JD has couch. All right, Jason, if I could give you a free subscription, if I could subscribe for you or get you a TY t-shirt, I would, because that is one of the funnier comments we've seen this week. And look, is it inappropriate for us to be joking about couch spurs or how, the rust on JD's belt is from whatever he was doing with his belt rubbing up against a couch? And by the way, we have a video on Rebel HQ that's coming up about comedians who did a fundraiser for Kamala Harris, and their jokes about JD Vance and the couch were freaking hilarious. Is that inappropriate? Should Democrats be going high instead of low? Look, this is the world that we live in, thanks to Donald Trump, is filled with ridicule. That ridicule is effective. It worked for Donald Trump, and good for Democrats to be having a good time and saying, okay, Donald Trump is the king of these juvenile taunts. We're going to throw a few taunts his way as well and have some fun with it. And people laugh, and it's effective. It's far more effective, according to the data and the polling, than Joe Biden's somber Donald Trump was a threat to democracy, and this could be the last election we have. Well, that wasn't registering with a lot of independent and moderate voters because they couldn't see that. Really? You really think that Donald Trump's going to end elections? You really think that democracy is over if Donald Trump wins? It's hard. It's hard for people who are not very politically involved to sort of imagine that. It's easy for people to look up at a Trump rally or a Trump news conference or a J.D. Vance news conference or J.D. Vance stalking Kamala Harris's plane and agree that there's something off with these people. There's something weird. Do I want somebody weird to be the president? And somebody even creepier and weird to be the vice president? And it moves the needle. And weird, then when you transfer it to policy, getting into your bedroom and your exam room, if you're a woman, and having the government be there, that's a little bit sort of weird. Wanting to ban certain books and replace all books with the Bible, as some Republicans want to do, that's weird. Not honoring the separation of church and state and the Constitution, and just demanding that we have, religious items like the 10 Commandments must be posted in classrooms. To a lot of people, ignoring the separation of church and state is weird. So there's a connection with all of this. Now, again, the big news this week came with Kamala Harris announcing her running mate. It's hard to believe it was just 5 days ago. Tim Walz, the running mate from Minnesota, governor of Minnesota. And the ad of the week belongs to the Lincoln Project, which did just a brilliant spot. So let's run this.
The next Vice President of the United States, Tim Walz.
When Vice President and I talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make your own healthcare decisions. For our children to be free to go to school without worrying they'll be shot dead in their classrooms. A place where we settle our political differences not through violence, but with our votes. For education to be that ticket to the middle class, not crippling debt. Air that's clean. Water that's pure. Communities that are safe. If Trump gets a chance to return, he's going to pick up exactly where he left off 4 years ago. Only this time, it will be much, much worse. We aren't going back. We just got to fight. Because as soon-to-be President Harris says, when we fight, we win.
Uplifting ad, positive, enthusiastic. It's on point. It's on message. One of the unsung heroes, maybe not unsung, but one of the heroes of this campaign, if Democrats win, is going to be the anti-Trump Lincoln Project, which is a combination of anti-Trump Republicans and some Democrats. Their ads have been brilliant and masterful, and they have understood how to reach out and communicate messages both against Donald Trump, but also for Democrats. And the ads that they keep churning out are remarkable. So if you want to see the whole Lincoln Project library, go to YouTube and enter in the search bar Lincoln Project, and you'll see some of the great work that they're putting out. Okay, it is time for our lesson of the week. You ready for it? Or you want some more questions and comments? A couple more questions and comments. All of us struggle. We don't lose ourselves in corruption, says Sky Sage. Breaking, Vance's ex-love seat requesting a paternity test for the Ottoman. You know, it's funny you should say that, because one of the other jokes that I love this week was a joke about one night stand. You know, whether JD Vance is into one night stand. Get it? A one night stand or a night stand. I know, that's dad humor right there. My kids think, oh, Dad, come on. But you know what? The jokes almost sort of write themselves. And by the way, there was a moment this week where, I think it was a week ago, actually, when JD Vance spoke about he would have to sleep on the couch if he brought his wife upstage. And of course, Democrats howled, and that clip went viral. And then Donald Trump at his news conference, and again, sometimes I think, is Donald Trump channeling this, or is it just on his mind? Donald Trump was talking about Mar-a-Lago and how beautiful this room is, that the reporters are all in. And Donald Trump says, you know, when President Xi from China was here, you know, I met with him right here on a beautiful, magnificent sofa. And the sofa was right here where you all are sitting. Like, why would Donald Trump say that unless there's something on his mind about what's going on with JD Vance? It would also be so much like Donald Trump to say, well, my girlfriend, my furniture is so much more beautiful than whatever anybody else might have or be involved with or love. I can hear it now. Come on, Shuster. Don't go lowbrow. All right, let's finish with our lesson of the week. I'm going to remove the comment. Lesson of the week. It is August. And for anybody who knows me and can see that sort of helmet right up there, they know that I am a Michigan Wolverine. I graduated from the University of Michigan. I bleed maize and blue. Football season is magical to me. And I know it's magical to a lot of other people out there involved in politics and sports. And there's just something so incredible about college football. Well, the lesson that I want to draw, and because college football starts this month, is that I think all of us are happier when we have our passions and our joys, and we're able to share them with friends and like-minded folks, and even people who may come from different backgrounds. And so I want to play for you what I mean by sort of joy and love and sort of living in the moment and embracing it. I want to show you the pure joy that was last, well, let's see, it now goes back, what, 10 months, 8 months, when Michigan was playing in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. And it came down to the final play. Michigan was ahead in overtime, and Michigan had to get a stop of the Alabama offense from the 2-yard line. There was this video that was taken from the Michigan marching band, which was in that corner of the end zone. And I want you to watch this. The way they just hug each other, and there's confetti flying, and they just did the victors, and they're in the corner of the end zone. They saw Michigan's defense stop Alabama's quarterback, and they were crazy because they know that Michigan is playing for the national championship. That's the Michigan drum line as part of the marching band. Just the joy, the pure joy is amazing, regardless of which team you were hoping for. Just to see young people that excited and sharing something like this. Well, the next week there was another video on the final play. Well, that wasn't the final play, but Michigan is beating Washington by a couple of touchdowns. Washington's driving down the field. Michigan gets an interception to essentially ice the game. Mike Sanders still intercepts the Washington pass, returns it back into Washington territory. That ices the game for Michigan. Here's again the reaction, once again, from the Michigan marching band to that play. Watch. look, I could play the victors all day long and I would still get chills up and down my spine. But the University of Michigan football team, 2024 national champions, 15-0, undefeated record, remarkable. And whether you're a Michigan fan or a fan of Ohio State, God forbid, or Michigan State or anybody else, UCLA, new members of the Big Ten, USC, there is so much joy in sharing an experience and sharing something you love with friends and neighbors and people in your community. So when you're part of a band, when you're part of a team, when you're part of an ensemble, when you're part of a broadcast, when you're part of a political movement, there will be ups and there will be downs. But when you share something you love and you're able to be passionate about something with other people, that is what life is all about. And it feels great. So for everybody who's a college football fan, congratulations. We've made it to another college football season. If you're a professional football fan, great. Enjoy those games. If you're a fan of politics, if you're involved in campaigns, regardless of what it is, if you're doing something with other people that you love, you're going to be happy. And it's going to make the obstacles and it's going to make the losses easier to stomach. And it's going to make the victories and the championships that much sweeter. On behalf of everybody at Rebel HQ, what a show this has been. What a week it has been. We'll continue to keep you posted on all the political developments. Remember to go to Rebel HQ and hit the subscribe button. Actually, you can hit subscribe right on the live YouTube right now, and the algorithms will set it so that you can see videos, that stuff that we're doing. And remember to go to tyt.com and become a member there. And that will do it for this edition of Rebel HQ Live. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us. And go blue.